This week, the app that helps record and report sexual assault, the AI going after cancer, and the man who wants us all to live forever. As International Women's Day was marked this week, it brought with it further focus on the many issues still to be faced in bringing about true gender equality in all walks of life. The technology industry, of course, has its own issues. As we'll hear later, Silicon Valley's culture and its treatment of women raises a lot of questions. But tech can also be a force for good. It's been just 6 months or so since the Me Too movement gave a voice to so many women around the world who used social media to expose just how widespread sexual harassment and assault is. Many women feel that reporting sexual assault can also be really traumatic, and the experiences of some women in Silicon Valley have spurred them to create something that may make that just a little bit easier. Sumi Das has travelled to Stanford University to meet survivors of sexual abuse and the creators of Callisto.
Every tattoo tells a story. For Stanford University student Jacqueline Lin, the story is bittersweet. Lin was one of 50 sexual assault survivors invited to share the stage with Lady Gaga during the 2016 Oscars.
While we were rehearsing, I remember at one point we were all crying and hugging each other, and someone just said, we need to get a tattoo to commemorate this and to give us strength, something to look at when you're feeling down and to know that you're not alone.
Lynn says that a few days after she was assaulted by a friend in 2015, she told the Title IX office, which investigates sexual misconduct.
I decided to report because I didn't want him to do it to anyone else. And later I did find out that he had done a lot of harassment, stalking, and also assaulting someone else.
What was that experience like?
It was awful. My GPA dropped down, and I was fighting with the school back and forth every single hour, every single day.
Lynn, now an activist, wants greater transparency in the adjudication process.
They're trying to cover up the number of sexual assault that happen on their campus because that makes your university look safer. It's better for your public relation.
Stanford told Click, quote, "Sexual harassment and violence take away individual choice and agency, and we will not tolerate that." Stanford changed its Title IX process in 2016 and has begun reporting case numbers. In the U.S., 1 in 5 women is sexually assaulted while in college.
I was sexually assaulted by a friend. Over a year after that happened, I decided to report my assault. And I ended up finding the process of reporting to be more traumatic than the event itself. Feeling not believed by the people who I thought were there to protect me was incredibly destabilizing.
Jessica Ladd's ordeal spurred her to create Callisto, so college students like Lynn could have an online tool to report sexual assault.
They can, 1, just save what happened to them timestamp, doesn't have to go anywhere if they don't want it to. 2, report electronically to the authorities at their school. Or 3, just save what happened to them for now, but report electronically if somebody else names the same assailant.
You could think of Callisto as an information escrow agency. It holds onto records and only alerts schools when there's a match. Students often report to protect others. This matching feature helps do that by detecting repeat offenders. People might use different names, they may look different. How do you make sure you've got the right person?
We ask victims to put in not just the name of the perpetrator, but also a series of unique identifiers.
Currently, Facebook profiles are used to match. Some students want more ways to ID, and Callisto may add mobile numbers and email addresses in the future. 12 U.S. colleges use Callisto. The University of San Francisco was the first.
We knew students weren't reporting. If we looked at our numbers from once we first started with Callisto 3 years ago to now, there's definitely an increase of reporting. Callisto allows for our students to write what happened, to write about the incident. And sometimes just writing your perpetrator's name gives people power.
Seeing the need for Callisto, Shanta Katipamula led an effort to bring it to Stanford.
It's just available 24/7. And they've actually seen spikes, I believe, in usage during times like spring break when the Title IX office might not be available, but students wanted to file a report, or during the weekends when no one's staffing.
With Callisto, survivors recount what happened at their own pace, privately.
Often victims, including in in-person interviews, will want to seem credible, so they want to fill in all the details and tell a wonderful story arc, but that's not how memory works, and that's particularly not how memory works in the event of trauma. So being able to allow somebody to say, I don't know this answer, or I'm not sure of it, and only record things that they are sure of is really essential to make sure that that time-stamped record isn't later used against them.
Students must create a username, password, and a passphrase that can't be recovered. Not quite a one-click sign-up. That deters some users. For Callisto, it ensures privacy.
Because then we'd be having to store the password, which means that we could potentially decrypt the data, and we want to make sure that even we can't view what's in the form.
Since students choose whether to report assaults, some records are never seen by schools, but they're still useful.
We provide our institutions with an aggregate data report that gives them a better sense of what is happening in that stored record. What type of year is assault occurring? What type of assault is it? Is it involving alcohol? Is it not? What class years are involved?
Others are also working to make reporting less daunting. The Spot app creates a record from a user's conversation with a chatbot, while all voices will let employees report anonymously. Lynn isn't sure electronic reporting would have changed how her case was handled, though she sees its potential.
What I think Callisto is great for is to track perpetrators. If they decide to apply to grad school, if they decide to transfer school, I think that's where this can really come in and have a very powerful effect.
As we grow, we want to create one system, one database that allows us to track any perpetrator even as they move through space and time.
Which would give survivors a way to find out if their assailant is a repeat offender, something Ladd says she wonders to this day.
That was Sumi Das at Stanford University. Now, while Callisto was created by a team of mostly women, that is rare, even right here in Silicon Valley. Whenever I've been to visit, I've found it all too easy to think of the Valley as sharing the progressive values of San Francisco, where all colours and genders seem welcome. But the people I've met, those in charge of the startups and the tech giants, have been mainly men. It is quite obvious to us that women are underrepresented here, and there are those who feel that Silicon Valley is just as full of sexism and masculine culture as anywhere else.
It's the social challenge where the majority of people...
Emily Chang is a San Francisco journalist and the host of Bloomberg Technology. And in her new book, Brotopia, she's written about the industry that has always self-selected for men. First came the antisocial nerd who suddenly became part of the ruling class, and now, she says, it's the time of the cocky, self-confident risk-taker, the bro.
Silicon Valley is the heart of the most powerful industry in the world, and that is the technology industry. This is a world that is controlling what we see, what we read, how we shop, how we communicate, how we get around. The reality is the exclusion from this incredible and progressive industry was not inevitable. It didn't have to be this way. I think of all the women out there who might have started the next Facebook or the next Google or the next Apple, but never got a chance because they didn't look the part. And that is something that needs to change. Women hold just 25% of jobs across the computing industry. They account for 7% of investors. Women-led companies get just 2% of venture capital funding. The most important thing that we need to do is to acknowledge that Silicon Valley has become toxic for women. So what is bro culture? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Fratty parties, beer, behavior that is alienating towards women. I had 12 women over for dinner at my home, most of them engineers who work at companies like Uber, and Google. And the Uber engineers specifically told me they would often be invited to strip clubs and bondage clubs in the middle of the day. There was a heavy drinking culture. And so much of work in Silicon Valley gets done outside the office. So at the bar, at the conference, in the hotel lobby, and they're stuck in sort of an impossible catch-22. If they attend, they're disrespected and discredited. If they don't, they're shut out of important business and networking opportunities because very powerful people, very powerful men are at these parties. So many female entrepreneurs that I've spoken to have not just one story, but several stories to tell about how an investor has crossed the line. You know, one of the most sort of egregious examples that I found is an investor who, very prominent investor in companies like Twitter and Uber, who often hosted hot tub parties at his home. Well, what female entrepreneur wants to get in a hot tub and pitch a business while wearing a bikini and drinking beer? You know, these are the kinds of activities that have been very alienating to women and unfortunately have created a very unlevel playing field in Silicon Valley. I think about how different the world might be if women had been at the creation of some of these companies from the start. I sat down with Twitter co-founder Ev Williams and I asked him, if women had been involved in the founding of Twitter, would online harassment and trolling be such a problem? And he said he doesn't think so. They weren't thinking about that when they were building Twitter. They were thinking about all the wonderful and amazing things that could be done with Twitter. They weren't thinking about how it could be used to send death threats or rape threats. And as a result, online harassment is one of the biggest problems plaguing the internet today. If women had been more involved in building these products and building these services, maybe online harassment and trolling wouldn't be such a problem. I fully believe that the people who have already changed the world in so many wondrous ways, the people who are taking us to Mars, the people who are building self-driving cars, the people who have given us rides at the push of a button, if they can do all that, they can change this too.
Hello and welcome to the Week in Tech. It was the week that Sony blocked the video game Super Seducer from being released on the PlayStation 4. It's being criticised as too sleazy and for promoting toxic behaviour. Dyson announced it won't be making plug-in vacuum cleaners anymore. They'll be developing their cordless battery range. Dating app Bumble has banned members from posing with guns in their profile pictures, though an exception is being made for military and law enforcement officers in uniform.
Solving in 3, 2, 1.
And a robot managed to solve a Rubik's Cube in under a second. Blink and you'll miss it. Here it is again in slow-mo. It was also the week that mobile companies 3 and Vodafone came under investigation over the way they handle data on their network. Ofcom's looking at whether they're intentionally slowing down internet speeds while customers are abroad. Internet artists invaded New York's Museum of Modern Art, transforming the Jackson Pollock Room into their own augmented reality gallery without the museum's permission. The project was called Hello, We're from the Internet. And finally, Flippy the robot has begun working at a restaurant in LA. Its job, yep, you've guessed it, flipping burgers. It uses image recognition and heat sensing to cook. The company Cali Burger is installing Flippy in 50 locations, but it's not cheap at $60,000 a robot. Hope those burgers taste good.
The idea of personalised or precision medicine is really gaining ground. And in the not too distant future, every single time we're prescribed something, exactly what that is could be dependent on our height, weight, sex, and even our genetic makeup.
Personalising your medication doesn't always need complex biomedical data to be beneficial, though.
What I have here is the beta version of the ExactCure app. You input your date of birth, your height, your weight, your sex, and details of any other medication that you're taking, because that could have an effect. After you've done that, you can put in information on what drug you're about to take. And this is how you do it. So this is paracetamol. Now, I would probably take 2 500 milligram tablets, so let's see the effect that would be likely to have. Well, it's going to last about 4 hours, which is pretty much what I would have expected. But where this darker blue is showing, it shows that I could be ever so slightly overdosing. So someone of my height and weight maybe doesn't need to be taking 2 tablets in one go.
Whilst the dark blue may represent a little more than needed, when you're clearly taking too much, the dial will turn fully red.
With a simple questionnaire on you, on your environment, on your body, with something like 5 or 6 questions, we can cover something like 90% of the cases. And for the 10 remaining %, we need complementary information, like are you a smoker or not, which kind of regimen do you have, and of course genetics. We think that pharmacists in the future should have a very important role to play in this ecosystem, not only by selling drugs, but by selling the exact drug and the exact dose for their patients.
Artificial intelligence is at the forefront of this revolution, analysing massive quantities of biomedical data that could transform treatment.
Well, imagine you're a scientist and you could read every piece of information that had ever been written about biomedicine. You could store that information and then you could use it to make new discoveries in diseases.
There are billions of potential combinations of genes, diseases and drugs. And here, hugely powerful algorithms are at work to establish the best combinations. Genetics will also play a central role in personalising what you're prescribed in future. AstraZeneca are analysing genomes from over 2 million people, and this data could soon be at your GP's fingertips.
Patients will actually be at the point where maybe they'll be able to go into the clinic, go into your local GP and have that genotype already available, so that the doctor will then be able to look up not only the type of genotype, but your individual genotype and match that to the best medicine for you. Some people are even talking about doing this at birth, so that by the time you develop a disease, the doctor's already got your DNA.
So any one-size-fits-all approach to medicine could soon become a thing of the past, with your prescription always being specific to your needs.
That was Lara looking at the very specialist techniques that may soon treat the diseases none of us want to face. But there are those who are going further. They're not just trying to treat, manage and cure life-shortening diseases, they're actually trying to lengthen the human lifespan. In an unassuming research facility in Silicon Valley, I met Aubrey de Grey, who's leading a project that treats aging itself as a disease, which can be cured. And he's made some seemingly rather outlandish claims in the past. Am I right? You are the guy that said the world's first 1,000-year-old has already been born.
I always make clear that it's only something I think is probable. But yes, I do think it's probable. Because if we look at the logic here, it's very straightforward. The risk of dying in your 20s is low. You know, if you reach your 26th birthday, your chance of reaching your 27th birthday is very high. Not reaching it is less than 1 in 1,000. So the only reason that people don't live to 1,000 already is because of aging. It's because their probability of death in the coming year goes up. It happens to go up by about 10% per year. So
Does it?
10% per year, that's right.
10% per year?
You are 10% more likely to die at the age of exactly 63 than you are at the age of exactly 62, and so on.
Blimey, that's quite high.
Point is, if we can fix this damage, then that doesn't happen anymore. The probability of dying stays being limited only by the probability of things that don't have to do with how long ago you were born.
So what you're saying is that you think within the lifetime of someone that's just been born, you will learn how to effectively cancel out aging.
We develop ways at the molecular and cellular level to repair the damage that the body does to itself throughout life. This is something I've called longevity escape velocity. We are not talking about massively lengthening human lives. We are talking about massively lengthening people's healthy lives. If people can stay healthy for longer, I think generally there would be approval from society.
What do you see society being like if everyone had massively extended lifespans.
That's not what gets me out of bed in the morning, what society's going to be like. What gets me out of bed is the fact that I don't like people getting sick. You know, I don't like the fact that 100,000 people a day die of aging. And, you know, I'd like to hasten the defeat of that problem. Also, you've got to take into account that people are only going to get older at 1 year per year. You know, I mean, we're not going to have any 1,000-year-old people at all for at least 900 years, whatever happens. And that's quite a long time to figure out what to do about it.
The enigmatic Aubrey de Grey. Wow, can you imagine living in a world where we all might live to be more than 1,000? That would be strange, wouldn't it? Mind you, first we'd all have to get past the year 2049, which, according to the recent Blade Runner movie, is a pretty bleak time. Now, that film won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects last weekend, and to celebrate, we thought we'd bring you some extra behind-the-scenes science that went into making that world.
I think you found him.
That's not possible. If this gets out, we've bought ourselves a war.
There was obviously a huge responsibility to deliver something for the audience of Blade Runner from the first one. The expectation visually, making everything look cool, was on our mind every day. The demands of Vegas and the expectation of making something that was based on what we know of Vegas now, but what it would be in the future. So we started with US geo data of the Vegas Valley and the city itself. So we had a simple model in the computer. Dennis Gosner, the art director of the film, had built a simple model of Vegas with Sid Mead buildings loosely placed around and so forth. So we took those two and sort of smashed them together initially. So we looked for ways of, very subtly, how to bring in the human element into the shots, how to sell that scale. Analyzing some of Sid's work and how he used graphics on the face of his buildings, how he, in a lot of his paintings, used little human scale futuristic items. So we built all that stuff and placed it around the city in an organized way to make it look like people were there at one time, even though we see no one. And that's what made it look real or look like a place that people could have been in. To build Trash Mesa was based on the idea that everyone had moved to the city and all the structures outside the city had been pretty much abandoned. There was no power, there's no water, nothing outside. So the trash that's generated from the city was dumped on the buildings outside the city. Again, we wanted to base things on as much reality as we could. So we started with the landscape of current day California from Los Angeles to San Diego. And we determined that Iceland was the place to photograph the groundscape and the beach. So through aerial photography of that, we placed the two on top of each other. And then the sequence of the ships was based on the Bangladesh ship harvesting yard where they recapture all the metal and so forth that happens now. So a lot of the ships and the pieces of the ships and the idea of these little tiny human beings working on these massive structures sort of drove that look through the middle of that sequence. So it's a matter of grabbing all these components that were based on today's reality, scaling them so they have this massive relationship between Kay and his little spinner and this enormous landscape and this huge mounds of trash. It was just a matter of pulling off that scale and that distance, which was just a massive undertaking just in the amount of data and assets we had to build and things we had to manage in itself to pull that off.
The future of the species is finally unearthed.
Oh, it is a brilliant film, absolutely superb. Blade Runner 2049, a well-deserved Oscar win there. That's it from us for this week. Don't forget we live on Twitter at BBC Click and on Facebook too. Thank you very much for watching and we will see you soon.